a hand raised in anger in a room filled with 100 silent witnesses, a sound that shatters more than just the silence of a lavish dinner party. It shatters a life, a marriage, and an illusion of power. For Audrey Thorne, the stinging slap from her husband, Vincent, was not an end. It was the starting gun. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Audrey's silent suffering had a price, and her quiet, unassuming brother was about to present the bill. He wasn't just a supportive sibling. He was Jonathan Knight, a man who moved markets the way others move chess pieces, and he was about to checkmate Vincent's entire empire. This is the story of how a single act of public humiliation triggered a corporate war that brought a titan to his knees. The air in the penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park was always thin, kept at a precise 68 degrees Fahrenheit by a climate control system that cost more than the average suburban home. It was an atmosphere Audrey Thorne had learned to breathe, but it never felt like oxygen. It was manufactured just like her smile, her posture, and the carefully curated life she shared with her husband, Vincent Thorne. Vincent was a man carved from ambition and polished with arrogance. He was the CEO and founder of Thorne Dynamics, a rapidly expanding tech and logistics firm that had made him a formidable name on Wall Street. He saw the world as a series of assets to be acquired and liabilities to be managed. To his profound and ever-present disappointment, he had long ago filed his wife, Audrey, under the latter category. Tonight was the annual Thorne Dynamics Charity Gala, the pinnacle of the New York social calendar. It was not, in fact, about charity. It was about Vincent reinforcing his position at the top of the food chain. The event was to be held at their sprawling Hamptons estate, a monument to modern architecture and cold, impersonal wealth. Every detail, from the Michelin-starred caterer to the particular vintage of champagne being served, had been personally approved by Vincent. Audrey stood before the full-length mirror in their dressing room, a cavern of polished marble and dark mahogany. She was adjusting the strap of her emerald green gown, a stunning silk creation that felt more like armor than clothing. "Is that what you're wearing?" Vincent's voice cut through the silence. He entered the room already in his tuxedo, knotting his bow tie with brisk, impatient movements. He didn't look at her, but at her reflection, his eyes scanning her with the critical gaze of a jeweler searching for a flaw. "You picked it out?" "Vincent," Audrey replied, her voice soft, almost a whisper. It had grown softer over the years, a subconscious defense mechanism to avoid provoking his temper. "I approved it from a catalogue. On you it looks underwhelming. It highlights how pale you are. You should have gotten a spray tan, like I suggested." He finally turned to face her, his lip curling in faint disgust. "And that necklace. It's too delicate. It makes you look weak. Wear the diamonds I bought you after the Sterling merger. They're so heavy, Vincent." She murmured her hand instinctively, going to the simple gold locket around her neck. It had been a gift from her brother, Jonathan. It was the only piece of jewelry she owned that felt like it belonged to her. "Don't be difficult, Audrey. This evening is about projecting strength. My strength. You are a reflection of me. Tonight I need you to be a flawless, brilliant mirror, not a murky puddle." He didn't wait for an answer, striding out of the room. "The helicopter leaves in 20 minutes. Be ready." Audrey stared at her reflection. A murky puddle. That's what he saw. She used to paint. Before Vincent, her canvases had been filled with vibrant colors, with chaotic but beautiful landscapes. She had a small studio in the city, a place she hadn't visited in years. Vincent called it her childish hobby, and made it clear that the wife of a man like him had responsibilities, not pastimes. So she had packed away her brushes, and the colors within her had slowly faded to grey. She unclasped the locket and placed it carefully in a velvet-lined drawer. She then walked to the large, imposing safe hidden behind a panel in the wall. With a heavy sigh, she retrieved the diamond necklace. It was a cold, ostentatious thing, a collar of immense, glittering stones that felt like a beautifully crafted cage for her neck. As she fastened the clasp, its weight was immediate and oppressive. It was the price of admission to her own life. Downstairs, the final preparations for their departure were underway. Staff moved with quiet efficiency, their fear of Vincent palpable. He was pacing in the grand foyer, barking into his phone at some unfortunate subordinate. "I don't care what the projections say, Gregory. You close the Odyssey deal by Monday, or you'll be handling traffic reports from a helicopter in Omaha. Do you understand me?" He snapped the phone shut and threw it onto a marble table. He saw Audrey descending the staircase, and his scowl deepened. Finally. "Let's go." He grabbed her arm, his grip just a little too tight, and steered her toward the private elevator that led to the rooftop helipad. As they ascended, the city lights spreading out below them, Audrey felt a familiar sense of detachment. She was an actress in a play she had never auditioned for. Tonight, she would play the part of the adoring, elegant wife. She would smile, she would laugh at the appropriate jokes, and she would be the perfect accessory to Vincent's ambition. But as the helicopter's blades began to whip the air, a strange, cold feeling settled in her stomach. It wasn't the usual anxiety or dread. It was something different. It was the chilling calm before a storm. She didn't know why, but she felt that the performance tonight would be her last. The mirror Vincent wanted was about to crack. The Hamptons estate was ablaze with light, a beacon of opulence against the dark Atlantic Ocean. Guests milled about the vast lawn and poolside terrace, a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. The air buzzed with forced laughter, hushed business deals, and the clinking of champagne flutes. It was, by all accounts, a spectacular success. Audrey moved through the crowd with practiced grace, a faint, polite smile fixed on her face. She was the perfect hostess, greeting hedge fund managers, tech moguls, and city officials with a quiet dignity that many mistook for shyness. Vincent was in his element, holding court near the massive ice-sculpted centerpiece of the Thorne Dynamics logo. He was loud, charismatic, and utterly captivating to those who didn't know the man behind the mask. For hours, Audrey played her part. She discussed art with the wife of a senator, praised the catering to a food critic from a high-profile magazine, and deflected questions about her own life with vague, pleasant non-answers. All the while, she felt Vincent's eyes on her, monitoring her, judging her every interaction. The incident began as most of Vincent's cruelties did with something small. Audrey was speaking with Mr. Henderson, an elderly and highly respected board member of a rival corporation. He was a kind man with a genuine interest in art, and for a few minutes Audrey forgot herself. She spoke animatedly about the Impressionists, about the use of light and color, a spark of her old self flickering to life. Vincent materialized at her side, his arm snaking around her waist with a possessive tightness that made her wince. "Darling," he said, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr. "I hope you're not boring Mr. Henderson with your little hobbies." Miss Henderson smiled graciously. "Not at all, Vincent. Your wife is incredibly knowledgeable. I was just saying she has a better eye than half the curators in this city." Vincent's smile didn't reach his eyes. She dabbles. It's what keeps women like her occupied, isn't it? He gave her waist a sharp squeeze, a silent command to be quiet. The conversation ended awkwardly, and Mr. Henderson soon excused himself. The moment he was out of earshot, Vincent's grip tightened painfully. He leaned in his breath, hot against her ear. "What did I tell you? You are here to be seen, not to lecture people on finger painting. You made yourself look foolish, and by extension you made me look foolish." "He was being kind." "Vincent," Audrey whispered, trying to pull away. "He was pitying you," he hissed, "and I will not be pitied." Later in the evening, as the main course was being cleared, Vincent stood to make his speech. He spoke of philanthropy, of innovation, of the glorious future of Thorn dynamics. He was met with thunderous applause. As he sat down, flushed with his own importance, he turned to Audrey. "Well, what did you think?" he demanded, his voice low enough that only she could hear over the din of the party. "It was a very powerful speech, Vincent," she said honestly. He scoffed. "Don't patronize me. I saw your expression. You looked bored. Do you have any idea how much this night costs? How important it is for our image?" I wasn't bored. I was just thinking. Thinking, he sneered. "About what?" "Which shade of beige you want to paint on your next useless canvas." A tiny ember of defiance sparked within her. "I was thinking about the community clinic you promised to fund last year, the one that was quietly defunded 3 months ago. The reporter from the Times asked me about it earlier." I didn't know what to say. Vincent's face went rigid. The charming mask fell away, revealing the cold fury beneath. He had used the clinic for a single press cycle and then abandoned it. Her mentioning it was a betrayal of the highest order. It was an acknowledgement of an imperfection in his flawlessly constructed narrative. You did what his voice was a deadly calm. "I just told him I wasn't involved in the company's philanthropic disbursements," she said, her heart starting to pound. "You should have said nothing. You should have smiled and walked away. Instead, you engaged. You showed weakness." His eyes were like chips of ice. The table was filled with their most important guests, including Gregory Finch, his sycophantic right-hand man, and several key investors. They were all engaged in their own conversations, but a subtle tension was beginning to emanate from the head of the table. "He cornered me, Vincent. You are my wife. You are not to be cornered. You project strength. You are a fortress. But you're not, are you? You're a liability." He said the word liability with such venom, such finality, that something inside Audrey snapped. After years of being belittled, controlled and diminished, that one word was too much. "I am not a liability," she said, her voice quiet but clear, imbued with a strength she hadn't felt in a decade. "I am a person, and that clinic was important. Those people were counting on you." The entire table fell silent. Every eye was now on them. Gregory Finch looked like a deer in the headlights. The sudden quiet amplified the tension, making it a physical presence. Vincent's face, which had been pale with rage, was now flushing a deep, mottled red. To be questioned, to be challenged by her, in front of these people, it was an unforgivable sin. He leaned in close, his voice a guttural whisper. "You will never ever question me again." And then he did it. It wasn't a wild, drunken swing. It was a precise, controlled, and utterly contemptuous act. He raised his hand and slapped her hard across the face. The sound was like a gunshot in the pristine silence. It was sharp, ugly, and absolute. Audrey's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. A collective gasp went through the guests nearby. Time seemed to freeze. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the distant crash of the ocean waves. The stinging on her cheek was a hot, spreading fire, but it was nothing compared to the glacial cold that was flooding her veins. She slowly turned her head back to look at him. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Her expression was unnervingly blank. She looked at Vincent, seeing him for the first time, not as her husband, but as a monster wearing a tuxedo. She saw the shock on the faces of their guests, the mixture of horror and morbid fascination. She saw Gregory Finch quickly look down at his plate, refusing to meet her eyes. Vincent, realizing what he had done in public, tried to recover. She's overwrought, he stammered, attempting a weak, dismissive laugh. The stress of the evening. But no one was laughing. Without a word, Audrey stood up. She did not adjust her dress. She did not touch her face where a red mark was already blooming on her pale skin. She simply stood, her posture unnaturally straight. With all the dignity she could muster, she turned her back on her husband, on their guests, and on the entire life they had built. She walked away from the table, her footsteps silent on the thick grass. She walked through the stunned crowd, past the ice sculpture that was beginning to melt under the lights, and into the vast, dark house. She didn't run. Her movements were deliberate, each step an act of finality. Once inside, she didn't go to their bedroom. She went to the small, sterile guest room on the ground floor, locked the door, and pulled out her phone. Her hands were perfectly steady. She scrolled through her contacts and pressed the one name that represented safety. The one person in the world who had never asked her to be anything other than herself. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Jonathan," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "I need you." Jonathan Knight operated out of a modest, unpretentious office in a less fashionable district of downtown Manhattan. There was no sprawling corner suite with panoramic views, no expensive art on the walls. The space was functional, filled with monitors, displaying complex market data stacks of financial reports and whiteboards covered in intricate diagrams. It was the nerve center of Knight Industries, a private equity firm so powerful and discreet that its full scope was known only to a handful of people. Jonathan preferred it that way. He wasn't like Vincent, who needed to broadcast his success to the world. Jonathan's power was the quiet, tectonic kind, unseen, until the landscape irrevocably shifted. He was in his late 30s, with a calm, watchful demeanor that often led people to underestimate him. He had the same gentle eyes as his sister Audrey, but behind them was a mind that moved with the cold, calculating precision of a supercomputer. He had built his empire from nothing, guided by a simple principle. Information is the most valuable currency, and patience is the sharpest weapon. When Audrey's call came, he was analyzing a potential acquisition in the German renewable energy sector. He saw her name on the screen and answered immediately, a rare smile touching his lips. "Audrey. Everything all right?" "How's the party, Jonathan?" she said, and the tone of her voice erased his smile instantly. It was a flat, hollow sound, like a bell that had been cracked. "I need you." He didn't ask questions. He didn't need details yet. The only thing that mattered was the raw pain he heard in those 3 words. "Where are you? The Hamptons house. In a guest room. Lock the door. Don't speak to anyone. I'm coming." He hung up the phone and stood. The multi-billion-dollar German deal vanished from his mind, replaced by a singular, ice-cold focus. He walked into the adjacent office where Rebecca Vance, his chief operating officer and legal counsel, was working late. Rebecca was a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her 40s with a reputation for being utterly relentless in a negotiation. She was one of the few people Jonathan trusted implicitly. "Clear my schedule for the rest of the week," he said, his voice dangerously level. "Cancel the Frankfurt trip. Something's happened with Audrey." Rebecca looked up, her expression immediately serious. She knew how much Jonathan cared for his sister. "What do you need the company helicopter?" "I need to be in the Hamptons in an hour. And get our security team on standby. A discreet unit. I also want you to start a deep dive portfolio analysis on Thorn dynamics. Everything. Debt structure, shareholder agreements, key personnel, supply chain vulnerabilities, pending litigation. I want to know where every single dollar comes from and where every single skeleton is buried. Use our top people. Spare no expense." "Jonathan, what happened?" she asked softly. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering along his cheek. Vincent Thorn just made the biggest mistake of his life. An hour and a half later, Jonathan landed on a private airstrip a few miles from the estate. A black, nondescript car he had arranged was waiting. He found Audrey exactly where she said she would be. When she opened the door, the sight of the vivid red mark on her cheek sent a wave of pure, unadulterated fury through him. But his face remained a calm, reassuring mask for her. He didn't speak. He simply opened his arms, and for the first time that night, Audrey broke. The rigid control shattered, and she collapsed against him, sobbing into the fabric of his jacket. He held her, stroking her hair, letting her release the years of pain and humiliation. He did it in front of everyone. She wept. 100 people. And they just watched. "It's over now, Audrey," Jonathan said, his voice a low, soothing rumble. "You're never going back there. I'm taking you home." He led her out a side entrance to the waiting car, bypassing the lingering guests and the chaotic aftermath of her departure. Vincent had tried calling her phone a dozen times, followed by a string of increasingly desperate and then angry text messages. She ignored them all. They drove back to the city in silence. Jonathan took her not to her penthouse, but to a secure, beautifully appointed residence he owned at the Mandarin Oriental, a place she had never known existed. He made sure she was comfortable with food, a change of clothes, and a security guard posted discreetly in the hallway. "Get some rest," he told her, his voice gentle. "We'll talk in the morning. Nothing can touch you here." Audrey, exhausted and emotionally drained, could only nod. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Jonathan did not rest. He returned to his office where Rebecca was waiting for him. The whiteboards had been wiped clean. On the central monitor was the logo of Thorn Dynamics. The preliminary report, Rebecca said, sliding a tablet across the table. "Thorn Dynamics is over-leveraged." Vincent expanded too fast. "He has a massive loan with Deutsche Bank due for refinancing in 6 months. He also has 2 major government contracts, one of which, codenamed Odyssey Project, accounts for nearly 40% of his projected annual revenue. The company's stock is trading high, but it's a house of cards. Any significant disruption could cause a major valuation collapse." Jonathan absorbed the information, his eyes scanning the data with incredible speed. His anger had now cooled and hardened into something far more dangerous, a plan. "I don't want to ruin him, Rebecca," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "That's too simple. Ruin is passive. I want to take it from him. I want to own the company he built. I want to stand in his office, sit in his chair, and sign the papers that make his life's work mine." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. A hostile takeover of that scale? It's bold. It's risky. He still holds a majority of the voting shares. Every fortress has a crack in the wall, Jonathan said. We need to find it. Start with the Odyssey project. A contract that large always has strict morality and key person clauses. A public scandal involving the CEO could be a breach. Then start buying. Use shell corporations. 3 of them based in different jurisdictions. Will buy quietly, accumulating a non-controlling but significant stake. Don't let the price move more than a point or 2. I want to be a shark circling in the dark. He won't even see the fin until it's too late. He looked out the window at the sleeping city. Vincent Thorne was in his palace across the park, probably drunk, probably furious, but feeling secure in his power. He thought this was a domestic dispute. He thought he could apologize, buy Audrey another piece of jewelry, and smooth things over. He had no idea that a war had just been declared. Jonathan Knight was not a man who fought battles. He engineered complete and total victories. And for what Vincent had done to his sister, the victory would be absolute. The price for Audrey's pain would be everything Vincent had ever built and everything he ever was. The week after the gala was a masterclass in corporate camouflage. To the outside world, it was business as usual. Thorne Dynamics stock remained stable. And Vincent Thorne, after a brief and humiliating period of damage control, managed to spin the incident at the party as a private matter fueled by exhaustion and too much champagne. He issued a generic public apology for the unfortunate scene and made a conspicuous donation to a women's shelter, a move of such cynical hypocrisy that it made Jonathan's blood boil. Vincent believed he was weathering the storm. He had sent Audrey a mountain of flowers which were refused at the hotel. He sent pleading, then threatening emails which went unanswered. He assumed she was with her brother, licking her wounds. He imagined she would eventually come back, as she always did, once his anger had cooled and his wallet had opened. The idea that she was gone for good, and that her departure was the first tremor of an earthquake that would swallow him whole, never entered his mind. Meanwhile, in the quiet, methodical offices of Knight Industries, the war machine was spooling up. Jonathan's teams worked around the clock. 3 separate untraceable shell corporations, Orion Holdings, Lyra Investments, and Phoenix Capital, began purchasing shares of Thorne Dynamics on the open market. The buys were small and strategically timed, spread across different trading desks to avoid triggering any alarms. It was a slow, patient accumulation, like a rising tide. Vincent, blinded by his own arrogance, barely noticed. He saw a minor uptick in trading volume, but attributed it to positive market sentiment following a recent product launch. His CFO mentioned it in a morning brief, and Vincent dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "It's confidence in my leadership, Gregory," Vincent had boasted to his number 2. "The market knows that a little domestic drama doesn't shake an empire." Gregory Finch, however, was not so sure. He had been at that table. He had seen the look in Audrey's eyes when she left, and he had seen the dead, cold fury on Vincent's face after. Gregory was a survivor. His loyalty to Vincent was born of ambition and fear, not respect, and fear told him that something was wrong. The second phase of Jonathan's plan involved finding an ally inside the fortress. Rebecca's team had identified a potential candidate, Henry Coleman, the 58-year-old head of logistics. Henry had been with Thorne Dynamics from the very beginning, a loyal and brilliant strategist who had designed the very systems that made the company so profitable. But he was old school. He valued integrity and loyalty qualities Vincent had long since discarded. Recent chatter suggested Henry was on the verge of being forced into early retirement to make way for a younger, cheaper, and more pliable executive. Vincent had publicly dismissed one of Henry's recent reports as the work of a man who's lost his nerve. The insult had stung. Jonathan arranged a meeting, not in a boardroom, but on a park bench during a rainy Tuesday lunch hour. Henry arrived cautiously, clutching an umbrella, his face a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "Mr. Coleman," Jonathan began, his voice calm and direct. "My name is Jonathan Knight. I believe we have a mutual interest in the future of Thorn Dynamics." Henry was wary. "I don't know you, Mr. Knight. You know my sister, Audrey Thorn." Henry's expression softened instantly. "Mrs. Thorn. A lovely woman, a true lady. What her husband, what he does, it's a disgrace." He stopped himself, realizing he was speaking to a stranger. "Vincent Thorn is a man who mistakes cruelty for strength," Jonathan continued, "and loyalty for weakness. He is about to learn a very hard lesson about both. I am in the process of acquiring a controlling interest in his company. I intend to remove him. To do that efficiently, I need to understand the company's operational vulnerabilities. Specifically, I need everything you know about the Odyssey project." Henry stared at him, stunned. A hostile takeover. It was unthinkable. But as he looked at the quiet, intense man sitting next to him, he saw a seriousness that was undeniable. He thought of his own career, the years of dedication, now about to be thrown away. He thought of Vincent's constant belittling, his abusive temper, and most of all, he thought of the kindness Audrey had always shown him and his family. "The Odyssey project," Henry said slowly, his decision made. "It's a logistical nightmare, a high-tech surveillance and transport contract for a federal agency. The margins are razor-thin, and the performance clauses are brutal. Vincent cut corners on the infrastructure to win the bid. He used a substandard encryption software from a startup he secretly invested in, not the military-grade one specified in the tender. If there's ever a data breach, even a minor one, Thorn Dynamics would be in catastrophic default of the contract. The penalties alone would bankrupt the company." This was the crack in the fortress wall. It was more than a crack. It was a gaping vulnerability. "Can you get me proof of that?" Jonathan asked. "The original bid proposal, the software procurement orders, anything that shows the discrepancy." Henry nodded. "It won't be easy. It's all on a firewalled server. But I designed the system. I know the back doors." While Henry worked on securing the data, Audrey was beginning her own transformation. In the serene quiet of the hotel suite, she started to sketch again. First, it was tentative charcoal drawings, then small watercolors. Jonathan had a full set of professional art supplies, delivered no questions asked. As she worked, her mind, free from the constant stress of living with Vincent, began to clear. Memories, conversations, and details she had long since suppressed began to surface. One afternoon, she was speaking with Jonathan about Vincent's business. "He was always so secretive about Odyssey," she recalled, dabbing a brush in blue paint. "He had a private meeting very late one night about a year ago, with a man named Alistair Finch." Jonathan looked up from his laptop. "Gregory Finch's brother." "Yes," Audrey said. "Alistair runs a small software company, Cybernetic Solutions. I remember because Vincent was furious after the meeting. I overheard him on the phone with Gregory, shouting about a last-minute substitution and how it had better be bulletproof." Jonathan and Rebecca exchanged a look. Cybernetic Solutions. That was the startup Henry had mentioned. Vincent hadn't just used a substandard software. He had funneled the contract to his right-hand man's brother, a clear case of cronyism and a massive conflict of interest. The whispers in the boardroom were about to become a roar. Jonathan's shell corporations now controlled nearly 15% of Thorn Dynamics. The stock price had begun to creep up, and Wall Street was starting to notice the unusually high trading volume. Vincent, finally sensing a threat, but not its source, was growing paranoid. He ordered an internal review to identify the mystery buyer, but Jonathan's tracks were too well covered. Vincent saw shadows moving, but he couldn't see the shark circling beneath him. He was trapped in a cage of his own making, and the bars were beginning to close in. The foundation of his empire was rotten, and Jonathan Knight was about to send a wrecking ball straight through it. The information from Henry Coleman was the key, but the document Audrey remembered was the lock. Henry managed to smuggle a data stick out of Thorn Dynamics headquarters. It contained the technical specifications of the encryption software used for the Odyssey project, confirming it was the inferior product from Cybernetic Solutions. It also included internal emails where engineers had flagged significant security concerns, all of which were overruled by a directive that traced back to Gregory Finch's office. It was damning, but it was circumstantial. To prove Vincent's direct involvement and fraudulent intent, they needed a signed document, the original amended contract, or a purchase order bearing his signature. It would be on his private server, Henry explained over a secure line, or in his office safe. He keeps all his dirty laundry close. The office safe was a fortress within a fortress. But Jonathan remembered something Audrey had told him years ago, a story told as a joke. Vincent was so arrogant, so convinced of his own brilliance, that he used the same master passcode for everything important the date of his first major hostile takeover, a number that symbolized his ruthlessness and success. The problem was getting into the office. Vincent's executive suite was on the top floor, accessible only by a private elevator that required his keycard and biometric thumbprint. A direct assault was impossible. They needed a Trojan horse. The opportunity came in the form of the annual fire safety inspection, a mundane event that Rebecca's team discovered was scheduled for the following Wednesday. Her people, through a series of anonymous tips and well-placed complaints to the city fire department, managed to elevate the routine checkup into a full-scale systems audit, requiring access to every floor, including the executive suite. They also ensured that the firm contracted to do the inspection was one that Knight Industries had a long-standing and very discreet relationship with. While the plan was being set, Audrey's role became unexpectedly crucial. She was no longer just the victim. She was becoming an active participant in Vincent's downfall. The art had reawakened her mind, and with it, her memory. She spent hours with Rebecca, piecing together fragments of overheard conversations, names on visitor logs, and timings of late-night meetings. "There's a second safe," Audrey said one evening, looking up from a sketch she was working on. "Not in his office. It's at the penthouse, hidden behind a false panel in the library." Jonathan and Rebecca looked at her, surprised. "He called it his legacy safe," Audrey continued. "He kept personal papers there, old contracts, deeds, things he considered the bedrock of his empire. He showed it to me once years ago when he was drunk and bragging. He said, 'They can take the company, but they can never take the foundation.'" A chill went down Rebecca's spine. It was exactly the kind of melodramatic, self-important thing a man like Vincent would do. "Do you know the combination?" Jonathan asked gently. Audrey closed her eyes, her brow furrowed in concentration. It wasn't a number. It was a sequence, a series of clicks. He turned the dial, right, left, then right again. "I remember the sound." She mimicked the motion with her hand. He told me the sequence was based on the stock prices of the first 3 companies he ever bankrupted. It was a long shot, but it was a better one than trying to crack his office safe. The penthouse was her territory. While Vincent was at the office, she was still legally a resident. She had the right to be there. The plan was set for Wednesday. While the fire inspectors created a diversion at Thorn Dynamics headquarters, Audrey would return to the gilded cage one last time. Jonathan insisted on sending his best security operative with her, a man named Peterson, who could pass for a driver. Walking back into that penthouse was one of the hardest things Audrey had ever done. The air was still kept at a chilling 68 degrees. The oppressive silence was the same. But she was different. She was not the timid woman who had fled a week ago. She walked with purpose, her fear replaced by a cold, hard resolve. While Peterson stood guard at the door, Audrey went to the library. The room was lined with thousands of books Vincent had never read, their spines perfectly aligned. She ran her hand along the polished mahogany panels, just as she'd seen Vincent do. Her fingers found a small, almost invisible seam. She pressed, and a section of the bookshelf swung inward, revealing a sleek black safe. Her heart pounded in her chest. She took a deep breath and placed her hands on the dial. She closed her eyes, picturing Vincent, his smug face, his dismissive tone. She remembered the stock tickers he used to obsess over in the early days of their marriage. Right to 41. Left past 41. Twice to 18. Right to 25. She turned the dial, the soft clicks echoing in the silent room. On the final turn there was a heavy thud as the bolts retracted. It had worked. She pulled the heavy door open. Inside were not jewels or cash, but stacks of leather-bound folders. She began searching her hands, moving quickly. She found old deed stock certificates, and then a thin folder labeled Odyssey Procurement. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single-page document. It was a signed directive from Vincent Thorn to Gregory Finch, authorizing the substitution of the specified military-grade encryption software with the product from Cybernetic Solutions. The document explicitly stated the reason: significant cost savings and enhanced profit margin. At the bottom, in Vincent's arrogant, sprawling handwriting, was his signature. It was the smoking gun. He hadn't just approved the change. He had ordered it to maximize his own profit, knowingly putting a multi-billion-dollar federal contract at risk. She quickly took a picture of the document with her phone and sent it to Jonathan. A moment later, her phone buzzed with his reply. "Got it. Get out now. It's over." At the same time, across town, the diversion at Thorn Dynamics was working perfectly. The fire inspectors, with their clipboards and official uniforms, had demanded access to the executive server room for a routine systems check, causing a minor panic and drawing Vincent and his security team away from his office. Another inspector, a tech expert from Jonathan's team, was escorted to the executive suite. While the building's head of security was distracted, the expert used a sophisticated device to clone Vincent's keycard and lift a perfect copy of his thumbprint from his desk phone. It took less than 90 seconds. They now had everything. They had the document from the safe confirming Vincent's criminal intent. They had the means to access his office and private server whenever they chose. They had Henry Coleman on the inside, ready to corroborate the technical details, and they had a 17% stake in his company. The Trojan horse had been delivered. Its belly was full of soldiers, and the gates of Troy were about to be breached. Vincent Thorn was still sitting in his office, completely unaware that his kingdom had already fallen. All that was left was the final public annihilation. The first blow landed not on Wall Street, but on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. An anonymous, impeccably sourced leak detailed how Thorne Dynamics had knowingly used substandard technology in the execution of the highly sensitive Odyssey project. The article named Cybernetic Solutions its connection to Gregory Finch's brother and included a redacted but unmistakable image of the internal directive authorizing the switch. It didn't mention Vincent by name, but it didn't have to. The implication was clear and devastating. The market reaction was instantaneous and brutal. When the opening bell rang on Monday morning, Thorne Dynamics stock plummeted. It dropped 10% in the first 5 minutes, triggering a circuit breaker halt. Investors, terrified by the prospect of the federal government cancelling its most lucrative contract, started dumping shares in a panic. Vincent was in a state of apoplectic fury. He stormed through his office, screaming at his legal team, his PR department, and especially at Gregory Finch. "How did they get this?" he roared, slamming the newspaper down on his desk. This was buried. Who talked Gregory? His face ashen, could only stammer denials. "I don't know, Vincent. No one had access to that directive. But you and me." While Vincent was hunting for a traitor within his walls, Jonathan launched the second wave of his attack. At precisely 10:00 a.m., a formal notification was delivered to the Thorne Dynamics Board of Directors. Phoenix Capital, on behalf of its anonymous partners, was officially launching a hostile takeover bid, offering to buy all outstanding shares at a 20% premium over the previous day's closing price. Before the stock collapsed, this would have been a lowball offer. Now, it was a generous lifeline to terrified shareholders. Simultaneously, the federal agency overseeing the Odyssey project announced a full and immediate investigation into Thorne Dynamics' bidding and procurement practices, effectively freezing all payments on the contract. The company's primary revenue stream had just been cut off. The house of cards was collapsing in real time. Vincent's phone rang incessantly with calls from panicked board members and furious bankers. The loan from Deutsche Bank, which wasn't due for refinancing for months, contained a covenant that could be triggered by evidence of corporate malfeasance or a sudden catastrophic drop in stock value. They were calling in their loan. Immediately. Thorne Dynamics was facing a liquidity crisis it could not possibly survive. Vincent, cornered and desperate, called for an emergency board meeting that afternoon. He still held the majority of voting shares, but the board was comprised of 7 other members, investors and industry veterans who were watching their personal fortunes evaporate. His only hope was to convince them that this was a coordinated attack by a competitor and that he could weather the storm. He walked into the boardroom at 2:00 p.m., trying to project an aura of calm control. But the strain was evident on his face. The room was silent and tense. The board members sat around the long mahogany table, their expressions grim. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vincent began, his voice raspy, "we are under attack. This is a baseless smear campaign designed to devalue our company so a competitor can acquire our assets for pennies on the dollar. But I will not let that happen. I built this company from nothing, and I will defend it with everything I have." An elderly board member, a man named Philip Croft, cleared his throat. "Vincent, is the allegation true? Did you knowingly use inferior software on the Odyssey project? It was a calculated business decision to maximize shareholder value." Vincent snapped, his composure already cracking. "The technology is perfectly adequate." "The federal government seems to disagree," another member countered, "as does the market. We have lost 35% of our value in 4 hours. Just then the doors to the boardroom opened. Rebecca Vance walked in, followed by 2 other lawyers. "What is the meaning of this?" Vincent bellowed. "This is a closed meeting." "I believe we have a right to be here," Rebecca said, her voice calm and steady. She placed a stack of documents on the table. Phoenix Capital, along with its partners Orion Holdings and Lyra Investments, now controls a combined 32% of this company's shares, making us the 2nd largest shareholder after you. As such, we have a vested interest in this discussion. Vincent stared at her, his mind reeling. 32%. It had been acquired so quickly, so quietly. He was so focused on the leak that he hadn't seen the corporate raiders storming his gates. "Furthermore," Rebecca continued, "we have filed a motion of no confidence in the CEO Vincent Thorne on the grounds of gross mismanagement, corporate fraud, and actions detrimental to the company's financial health. We are calling for an immediate vote on his removal." "You can't do that," Vincent shouted, his face turning purple. "I control the voting shares." "That may be," Rebecca said with a thin smile. "But a vote of no confidence from the entire board will give any shareholder lawsuit to oust you on ethical grounds an almost certain chance of success. It will also convince any remaining business partners or banks that your leadership is untenable. You can fight this, but you will be fighting alone, and you will drag what's left of this company down with you." She looked around the table, making eye contact with each board member. "We, however, are offering another way, a path to stability. If Mr. Thorne is removed, our consortium is prepared to inject enough capital to satisfy the Deutsche Bank loan and stabilize the company through the federal investigation. We will save this company, but not with him at the helm." It was a perfectly laid trap. She was offering the board a choice: go down with the sinking ship, captained by a disgraced CEO, or throw him overboard and climb into a well-funded lifeboat. Vincent looked at the faces around the table. He saw no support. He saw only cold financial calculation. He turned to his last hope. "Gregory, tell them. Tell them. This is a lie." Gregory Finch, who had been silent throughout the entire exchange, slowly pushed his chair back. He stood up and looked not at Vincent, but at Rebecca. "The allegations are true," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I was following Mr. Thorne's direct orders. I am prepared to testify to that fact in exchange for immunity and a severance package." The betrayal was absolute. Vincent looked at Gregory as if he were seeing him for the first time, not as a loyal subordinate, but as the rat he truly was. The vote was a mere formality. One by one, every single board member voted to remove Vincent Thorne as CEO and chairman of the board, effective immediately. Vincent sat there stunned into silence, as his life's work was stripped from him in a matter of minutes. He was no longer a titan of industry. He was a pariah. Rebecca gathered her papers. "Security will escort Mr. Thorne from the premises. He will be allowed to collect his personal belongings from his office under supervision." As 2 grim-faced security guards entered the room, the main door opened one more time. Jonathan Knight walked in. He didn't look at the board or at Rebecca. He walked slowly, deliberately toward the head of the table and looked down at the man who had destroyed his sister's spirit. Vincent looked up, his eyes filled with dawning, horrified realization. "You," he breathed. "It was you." Jonathan said nothing. He simply held Vincent's gaze for a long moment, his expression unreadable, but his message clear. "This is for Audrey." Then he turned and walked to the window looking out over the city that had just that morning been Vincent's kingdom. Vincent Thorne, the great CEO, was then quietly and unceremoniously escorted out of his own boardroom, a broken man with nothing left but the echo of his own hubris. 6 months later, the name Thorne Dynamics was gone, scrubbed from the annals of Wall Street. The company had been restructured, rebranded, and reborn under the umbrella of Knight Industries as Apex Logistics. Under new ethical management, and with the full backing of Jonathan's capital, it had been salvaged. The Odyssey project contract was renegotiated, a settlement was reached with the federal government, and the company was slowly, painstakingly put back on a path to stability. Gregory Finch disappeared with a modest severance package and the permanent stain of being a turncoat. Vincent Thorne, after a series of failed lawsuits and public outbursts, faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered in the bars and boardrooms of the financial district. But this story was never truly about Vincent's fall. It was about Audrey's rise. Audrey did not return to the penthouse or the Hamptons estate. Both were sold off, their sterile, opulent contents liquidated. She moved into a beautiful light-filled brownstone in Greenwich Village that she bought with the proceeds from her divorce settlement, a settlement so swift and comprehensive that Vincent had no choice but to accept it. The house had a dedicated studio on the top floor with a skylight that bathed the room in a warm, natural glow. And in that room Audrey painted. She painted with a ferocity and passion she hadn't felt since she was a girl. The canvases were no longer filled with muted, hesitant landscapes. They were explosions of color, of emotion, of raw, untamed energy. She painted the fury of a storm at sea, the quiet resilience of a flower growing through a crack in the pavement, and the complex fractured beauty of a city skyline at dawn. She was not just putting color on a canvas. She was reclaiming the pieces of her soul that Vincent had tried to erase. One crisp autumn evening, Jonathan came to visit. He found her in the studio, her hands and clothes smudged with paint, a look of serene concentration on her face as she worked on a massive canvas. "It's beautiful, Audrey," he said, looking at the vibrant, powerful piece of art. She turned and smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that he hadn't seen in years. "It feels good, Jonathan. It feels like breathing again." They went downstairs and she made them tea. There was an easy, comfortable silence between them. "I have something for you," Jonathan said, placing a simple, elegant leather portfolio on the coffee table. Audrey opened it. Inside were official documents signed and notarized. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, and her breath caught in her throat. He had transferred his entire controlling interest in the rebranded Apex Logistics, the company that was once Thorne Dynamics, into a trust for which she was the sole beneficiary and trustee. She looked at him stunned. "Jonathan, I can't. It's everything. It's his entire company." "It was never about the company," he said, his voice soft but firm. "And it's not his anymore. It's a tool. It's a resource. It's a foundation for whatever you want to build next. You don't have to run it. The board is excellent. But it is yours. The profits are yours. The power is yours. He used his power to cage you. I want you to use this power to be free." Tears welled in Audrey's eyes, but they were not tears of sadness or pain. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude and release. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "You did this, your memory, your courage to go back to that house. You found the key, Audrey. I just opened the door." A few months later, the Audrey Knight Gallery exhibition opened in a chic Soho space. She had chosen to use her maiden name, shedding the last vestige of her old life. The gallery was packed. Critics, collectors, and art lovers buzzed with excitement, praising the debut of a powerful new voice in the art world. Audrey stood in the center of the room, not in a heavy diamond necklace and a designer gown, but in simple black pants and a white silk shirt. A single drop of emerald paint on her cheek. She was not reflecting anyone's light. She was glowing with her own. Her masterpiece was the centerpiece of the exhibition. It was a vast, abstract painting titled Shatter. It was a chaotic, beautiful swirl of emerald green, stark white, and the deepest black, but at its very center, emanating outward, was a brilliant, defiant splash of crimson. It was the color of a wound, the color of rage, but also the color of a phoenix rising. She watched as people stood before it, captivated. They saw a painting. She saw the story of her life. She saw the moment a mirror cracked not to break, but to finally let the light inside get out. She was free, not because her abuser had been punished, but because she had finally and completely reclaimed herself. The revenge was not the destruction of his company. It was the creation of her own life, a masterpiece painted in the bold colors of her survival. Audrey's story is a powerful reminder that the most profound revenge isn't about destruction, but about rebirth. It wasn't just about a billionaire brother avenging his sister. It was about a woman reclaiming her own voice, her own power, and her own identity from the ashes of a toxic marriage. Vincent's empire was built on a foundation of intimidation and fear, but Audrey's new life is built on the unshakable bedrock of her own strength and creativity. She proved that the greatest victory is not in tearing someone else down, but in building yourself up stronger and more vibrant than before. If this story of justice and rebirth resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who might need to hear a story of triumph over adversity. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more powerful stories of a person's life. Thank you for listening.